everyone, it's Katrina.
Ancient villages in the Wyoming mountains. Archaeologists in Wyoming have found a series of ancient villages that were deserted thousands of years ago by the original inhabitants of the region. Matthew Stern from the University of Sheffield, along with his colleagues, found the 13 ancient villages. By combing through the wreckage of these long-lost settlements, Matthew and his team have been able to learn more about the lives of the ancestors of modern Native American tribes, like the Northern Paiute, the Comanche, and the Shoshone. The villages were uncovered in the Wind River Range, built high up in the mountains over 2,000 years ago. What makes this discovery so fascinating is that scientists have generally associated high altitudes with prehistoric travel, but not living. Scientists said it made no sense for ancient people to be living high up in the mountains. Well, tell that to the Inca and Machu Picchu. But 13 villages make a pretty substantial statement, meaning all of these presumptions are completely invalid. See, told ya. The settlements were found at over 9,000 feet, so people definitely lived and even thrived at high altitudes. Researchers believe the main staple of food for these mountain villagers had been the pine nuts from white bark pine trees. They even found grindstones that were once used to mash up pine nuts for consumption. But this just goes to show that there is so much we don't know about the original inhabitants of America. Ancient viruses. Scientists studying glacier ice high up in the Tibetan mountains have stumbled upon viruses frozen in the ice for 15,000 years. These viruses survived because they remained frozen. They presumably could have continued to live for thousands of years more if they had been left in the ice. They were discovered because scientists took a pair of ice samples from high up in the mountains, about 22,000 feet above sea level. The ice on the glaciers formed gradually for a very long time, according to researchers from Ohio State University. As the ice was forming, it trapped dust, gas from the atmosphere, bacteria, and viruses. To make sense of this, think of the glacier ice as one big sticky rat trap. Year after year, whatever was floating in the atmosphere at the time that the ice was frozen was trapped. The next year, when more ice froze, whatever was in the atmosphere then was also trapped. All the scientists needed to do was drill down into the ice to get a timeline of all the different things that were captured from the atmosphere over the past 15,000 years. What they discovered were 33 viruses. 4 of them have already been identified by modern scientists, but 28 of them are new, and about half of those only survived because of the frozen conditions. What this means is that they probably can't live outside of an environment that isn't terribly cold. And while the viruses haven't proved contagious or fatal for humans yet, who knows what else could be lurking in the Tibetan mountains, trapped within layers of ice and snow. The Nanagat Cave Temple. The Nanagat Cave Temple is one of the most mysterious places in all of India. The temple itself is located in Nanagat, a mountain pass in the Western Ghats mountain range. The pass is about 75 miles north from the largest major city. In ancient times, it was part of a trading route traversed by merchants and their caravans, but the mountain pass is most famous for its cave temple, which has inscriptions in an ancient Indo-Aryan dialect that go back to the 2nd century BC. The inscriptions mostly speak of Hinduism and its many deities, but also refer to ancient rituals and the Satavahanas dynasty that once controlled the area. The Nanagat Cave was probably a rest stop used by travelers moving through the mountains. Its name literally translates to coin pass. This has led researchers to believe that someone had lived in the cave full time and collected a toll from any trader who wished to cross to the other side. In fact, what some archaeologists have mistook for a stupa is actually nothing but a roadside toll booth. The mysterious cave was first discovered in modern times in 1828 by a man named William Sykes who was hiking in the area. While not an archaeologist or a historian, this outdoor enthusiast on a hike made what turned out to be a fascinating discovery. Mountains on the moon. The famous astronomer Galileo Galilei made a rather impressive discovery regarding mountains. But this discovery was not actually on our planet. We need to look a bit further, all the way to the moon. Why? In 1609, Galileo became the first person to discover mountains on the surface of the moon. Back in 1609, people still believed that our planet was simply a realm where mortals lived. They thought that space was a heavenly place where all celestial bodies were completely perfect and smooth spheres. What I mean by that is that things like the sun, the moon, and every star in the sky was supposed to be a perfectly smooth and bright marble. When Galileo discovered that there are mountains on the moon, it created quite the upheaval. People were absolutely furious. They blamed Earth and the corruption of humans for the contamination of the moon. Up until Galileo's discovery, a lot of scientists explained the fact that there were dark patches on the moon by saying it was just different densities of different materials. There couldn't possibly be mountains because it was perfectly circular and smooth like a polished stone. But Galileo saw through his telescope small shadows that moved depending on the position of the sun. These shadows moved along the surface of the moon just like shadows move on the surface of the Earth when the sun rises and sets over mountains. To Galileo, this led to a very obvious conclusion. Unfortunately, the Church was not a big fan of this discovery. Later on, when Galileo tried to explain that the Earth revolves around the sun, he was sentenced to a lifetime of house arrest for blasphemy. Mysterious human remains. On a California mountain peak, the discovery of a skeleton created quite a mystery. It all began when a pair of climbers were reaching the top of Mount Williamson, the second highest peak in the state of California. They happened upon what looked to be a skeleton buried underneath some stones in a field of boulders. When they got close enough to inspect the skeleton, it was pretty obvious that it belonged to a person and that they had been dead for a very long time. Nothing remained of this individual except a pair of leather shoes, a worn-out belt, and of course, his pale white bones. According to the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, nobody has any idea who this person was, how they died, or really any facts of the case. The spokeswoman for the department, Karma Roper, said it's a huge mystery. Here are all the facts we have anyway. The body was discovered at an altitude of roughly 14,000 feet. The average person would not hike to such an extreme height. Plus, the hikers who found the body had accidentally strayed off course and gotten a bit lost. The body could have been there for years, or even decades. Yet there have been no missing people from the area that the skeleton could belong to. There's just nowhere to even start with the search. What do you think happened to lead to the dead man in the mountains? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos like these coming up. Mountains in the Earth. I've already told you about mountains on the moon, and now it's time to talk about subterranean mountains underneath the surface of the Earth. According to National Geographic, you could be standing at the very top of an enormous mountain, even taller than Mount Everest right now, and not even know it. This might sound like something out of a fantasy book, but it's completely true. There is a geological boundary that scientists found about 400 miles beneath the surface. The boundary has enormous mountains that would give you vertigo just trying to see their tops. How could we have possibly made such an amazing discovery? Scientists identified these subsurface mountains by using seismic waves from earthquakes. They tracked the signals kind of like extremely advanced subterranean echolocation to get a rough idea of the underground mountains. There isn't a hollow earth fantasy landscape 400 miles deep, but rather hard, rugged rock. The mountains were probably created by the rearrangement of elements and chemicals. The point is that something very strange is happening deep beneath our feet. If you broke the earth open like a coconut, you would find enormous mountains hiding near the center. Ancient Mexican mountain cave. At first glance, the Chiquihuite cave in Mexico doesn't seem like a very nice place to live. It's a dark, creepy, unforgiving cave high in the desert mountains of central Mexico. It's also been excavated continuously for about the last decade. The reason is that the mysterious cave holds evidence of human occupation in North America going back 30,000 years. For any of you who remember your history class, you'll probably remember that scientists used to believe that humans first arrived on the continent only 15,000 years ago, give or take a few years.
This one mountain cave, where primitive humans once rested their heads, has evidence that will make every school need to rewrite their history books. Archaeologist Cyprian Ardelean and his fellow researchers have already unearthed thousands of artifacts from the floor of the mountain cave. They found ancient blades, points from projectiles, and flakes of rock that had been used for making primitive tools. All the evidence points to human habitation. They even found bits of charcoal in the layers of sediment, meaning humans had been starting fires in the cave. It's possible that cave people lived here for around 15,000 or 17,000 years before they went out into the light and eventually formed great civilizations like the Maya and the Aztecs. If you really think about it, that's pretty amazing. People literally started off in Mexican mountain caves, gradually went up to the surface, and over a shockingly short amount of time, developed a complex society. Aliens in the mountains. A retired official who goes by the alias Anjali says that she had a meeting in 2018 with extraterrestrials in the Mojave Desert in Nevada. This woman claims to be a retired defense intelligence officer who was put in charge of forming a team of scientists. This team of scientists was charged with holding meetings with aliens. All of this may sound completely crazy, and maybe it is. Either way, she actually held a news conference at the Lincoln Memorial in August of 2021 to discuss her part, given to her by the United States government in parlaying with extraterrestrials. One of her other shocking claims is that deep in the Mojave Desert is an alien base inside a hollowed mountain. Her real name is Angelica Lynn Johnston, and she said in her news conference that she will be bringing an astronaut and some scientists to the secret base so that they can meet with the supposed aliens. But she never did give a date for when this is going to take place, and she couldn't actually give a specific location for the secret base. Either there are aliens living in the mountains of the Mojave, or this woman is a complete lunatic. We just don't know. The 1976 Bigfoot. In 1976, a man in Oregon was intent on proving that Bigfoot really does exist. His name is Peter Byrne, currently 95 years old, and still searching for Bigfoot. He's been searching for almost a century, despite the fact that everyone seems to think he's completely crazy, and that Bigfoot is nothing but a figment of people's imaginations. But to be honest, nobody has gone after Bigfoot harder than Peter. He went on an expedition in Nepal in the 1950s to try and discover the Yeti living in the Himalayan mountains. He found a few footprints up there in the snow at altitudes of 15,000 feet, but these were never authenticated as belonging to a great mountain ape. In the 1960s, Peter moved to Oregon and directed the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition. He continued trying to track down the elusive Bigfoot, sometimes known as Sasquatch. He even got in touch with the FBI in the 1970s after he discovered something mysterious in the Washington mountains. There had been a Bigfoot sighting at a campground with a large tuft of hair left behind. Peter got in touch with FBI Assistant Director J. Cochran Jr. in November of 1976 and sent the sample of hair to be tested. The FBI agreed to test the hair for Peter. Sadly, it turned out to be from a deer. And now, all these years later, Peter still hasn't been able to prove that a mountain monster exists, either in the mountains of Nepal or in the northwest of the United States. What about you? Do you think Bigfoot really exists? Let me know in the comments below. A box of treasure. Last summer, somebody stashed $10,000 in cash in the mountains of Utah. 17 days later, Andy Swagner from Draper found that buried chest while searching with his wife. It was filled, as promised, with $10,000 of cold, hard cash, a single silver coin, and a few other cool trinkets. He dug the buried treasure up at Hughes Canyon Trail near the mouth of the Big Cottonwood Canyon. Andy dug the treasure chest out from under a dead tree and told local news that he plans to use the cash to pay off some debts and then take his daughters to Disneyland. But let's back up a bit. Who in their right mind would bury so much money in a treasure chest just so people could go hunting for it? Well, it was hidden by John Maxim and David Klein as part of their second annual Utah treasure hunt. The hunt is supposed to be a thing that's happening every year now as a way to encourage people to go outside and get some fresh air. If you happen to be in Utah next summer, a trip into the mountains may just earn you a literal treasure.
Earth 2.0. For the first time ever, we may have found a planet just like Earth. The Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, codenamed TESS, has discovered the first planet ever that's the perfect distance from its star to support life, and is about the same size as Earth. It might even have water. NASA hasn't actually detected liquid water, but the conditions suggest it is a possibility. The planet is being called TOI 700d, and it's one of only a handful of planets the same size as our own within a particular star's habitable zone. The other planets like this that we know about have all been discovered by the Kepler Space Telescope, but TESS is a little bit different. It launched specifically to search for potentially habitable planets just like Earth. It does this by monitoring a large part of the sky known as a sector for 27 days before moving on to the next. This incredibly long stare allows the satellite to track all changes in brightness that would be caused by a planet orbiting its star. As for TOI 700d, it's only about 100 light-years from us, located in the southern constellation Dorado. Its star is about 40% the size and mass of the Sun, and only half its surface temperature. This means it's significantly smaller and colder than our own star. But because of the proximity of Earth 2.0 to this mystery star, the situation is perfect for breeding habitable life. The big problem is that we have no possible way of knowing if any life is thriving. But if the planet has a similar temperature to our own and liquid water, it would be a perfect candidate for our first intergalactic colony. What do you think? Are you ready for it? Let me know in the comments below. Liquid on Titan. On the largest moon of Saturn, Titan, scientists have detected giant canyons flooded with liquid hydrocarbons. The information comes to us thanks to data received from NASA's Cassini spacecraft. The spacecraft took some amazing photographs of very deep canyons on the surface of the moon, which researchers are now confident in saying are dark channels spreading out from the Ligeia Mare Sea, totally filled with liquid. This discovery was the first time that scientists were able to put forth real evidence that Titan has liquid-filled canyons. But of course, this isn't liquid water. For those who don't know, Titan is a frigid and very cold moon, the second biggest in the solar system, with large bodies of liquid methane. The moon is completely crusted over with hydrocarbon ice, and it has lakes and rivers of both liquid methane and ethane. It also has a thick atmosphere that scientists believe is a prime example of what the conditions were like when our solar system was first created. It's true that scientists already knew about Titan's methane seas, but they hadn't known about the canyons. NASA says they believe the canyons may have formed just like the Grand Canyon here on Earth, from thousands and thousands of years of a flowing river carving them out. These canyons are almost 2,000 feet deep in some places, and they are filled to the brim with black liquid methane. Oh yeah, and the surface temperature here is about minus 289 degrees Fahrenheit. Emissions from an alien world. Scientists believe they may have potentially detected radio emissions coming from an alien planet beyond our system for the first time in history. The astronomers behind the detection used a radio telescope in the Netherlands to study a trio of stars that host exoplanets. The researchers noticed that one star system really stood out from all the others, called Tau Boots. The radio signal they picked up was so strong and so polarized that they believe it must have come from a planet's magnetic field. This is according to Jake Turner from Cornell University, the lead author of this new and exciting research. This planet is about 51 light-years from Earth in the constellation Boots. And if you're wondering how an alien planet is able to emit signals that we can pick up here on Earth, it all goes back to Jupiter. These researchers first studied the kinds of emissions that were coming off Jupiter's surface. They then tweaked their measurements to reflect a greater distance from Earth and pointed the radio receiver deeper into the universe. It really all comes down to how powerful a planet's magnetic field is. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to detecting alien planets. Once scientists perfect the art of picking up radio emissions, they'll be able to see planets with magnetic fields very far from us. They'll also be able to tell a lot about the planet's history based on its magnetic field. The hum of plasma waves. As of right now, the Voyager 1 spacecraft is somewhere around 14.1 billion miles from the planet Earth, of course. It's moving at an outstanding speed of 38,000 miles per hour, and not too long ago, it passed across the boundary of our solar system and entered into the true Gulf of Space. And yet, despite this immense distance, Voyager 1 is still sending information back to us. And yes, it is still making new discoveries. One of these discoveries came to us in the form of a sound. Hearing a sound in space doesn't really make a lot of sense for one main reason. There is no sound in space. Sound cannot flow through an empty vacuum. It needs air to travel, or at least something that can act as a medium for the sound waves to pass through. Scientists believe the sound managed to reach Voyager 1 by traveling through space on invisible gases. The actual sound was the hum of plasma waves moving through space. These plasma waves were created by our very own sun. According to the NASA researchers, a solar wind carried gas billions of miles away from the sun when it expelled a burst of plasma. It was probably the result of a solar storm on the star's surface, when plasma spiked and a small burst of it got shot into space. Over 14 billion miles away, Voyager 1 actually picked up the sound of our sun basically belching. Ice volcanoes. NASA has made yet another outstanding discovery on the dwarf planet Ceres, this time in the form of icy volcanoes. Ceres never did get big enough to become an actual planet, instead getting the less popular title of dwarf planet. But even though this little piece of rock isn't technically a planet, it still has some pretty impressive geological features. Observations from NASA's Dawn spacecraft have shown that the little planet could be harboring cryovolcanoes at the bottom of some of its craters. Now, keep in mind that Ceres is located between Mars and Jupiter. It's a piece of rock mostly covered in ice, and a lot of this ice may actually be building up underground, just like lava builds up under volcanoes here on Earth. The cameras on the Dawn spacecraft showed physical flowing material just like lava at the bottom of the craters, except less viscous and tinged blue. It's the same color as material found at the top of a mountain on Ceres that scientists believe once erupted with a mixture of ice and mud. The theory now is that the flowing material is of a similar mixture inside the craters. It's ice mixed with mud and salt, and scientists say it could be erupting out of the weakest points on the dwarf planet's surface. To make things simple, it's ice volcanoes. Ceres literally has volcanoes erupting out icy mud instead of lava. Which do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. The Mars bug. A scientist from Ohio has made a wild claim that there are insects on Mars. He's based this claim on supposed photographic proof from various NASA Mars rovers throughout the years. His name is William Ramoser, and he isn't actually a crackpot. He is a professor and a specialist in the study of viruses transmitted by arthropods at Ohio University. His evidence is pretty shaky, really only coming from his own interpretation of the photographs, meaning that it can only be considered theory and isn't currently verifiable. He presented his bizarre findings at a national meeting held by the Entomological Society of America. He showed photographs taken from the Mars rovers that seemed to show tiny insects with legs, abdomens, heads, and all the other insect parts. And he claims there is diversity as well, with a lot of different kinds of bugs on the red planet. But according to other scientists, he's completely delusional. Pretty much everybody except him says that he's finding insects where there aren't any. He's looking at rocks and interpreting them as insect fossils. He's doing this in the same way that one might look at a cloud and interpret a dragon. Either that, or he's completely right and everybody else is just trying to cover up the fact that there are indeed insects on Mars. What do you think? Are there really insects on Mars, or is this guy just practicing some wishful thinking? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We have lots more videos coming up. Merging black holes. Scientists have discovered a collision between two supermassive black holes. It's one of the most catastrophic and destructive things that scientists have ever seen out in the universe. The pair of supermassive black holes are the nearest ever discovered to our planet. Astronomers say they are currently merging into a single monstrosity of unbelievable proportions. It's happening about 89 million light years away from us in a galaxy called NGC 7727. Scientists have been measuring the mass of each of the black holes by watching how gravity affects the movement of the nearby stars. Observations with the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope have shown the two giant black holes are only 1,600 light-years away from each other. In cosmic distance, they are basically breathing in each other's faces. This small separation between the black holes suggests that they will merge into one giant, massively supermassive black hole within the next 250 million years. This is what Holger Baumgart says, a professor at the University of Queensland, Australia. And to give you an idea of just how powerful these celestial objects are, the bigger of the two contains the mass of 154 million suns. The smaller one only contains the mass of 6.3 million suns. But still, the power of these celestial bodies is completely insane. They aren't a danger to us, but you definitely wouldn't want to fly your starship anywhere near them. Dark matter stars. There is a possibility that stars composed totally of dark matter once populated the universe. This isn't a true discovery, more of a theory, but one that's quite interesting anyway. Scientists say that when the Big Bang first happened, the universe was much smaller than it is today. In the smaller environment, dark matter came into existence, and it was then that scientists believe that dark stars may have been born. But here's the twist. Dark matter stars wouldn't have actually been dark. Instead, they would have been the biggest and brightest objects in the universe. No one has ever seen one with their eyes. At least no human ever has. But we are currently looking. And if you're a bit confused about dark matter, so is everybody else. Scientists say that at least 26% of the universe is made of dark matter, and that thousands of these particles pass through your body every second. It's just impossible to detect and study because dark matter is intangible. It emits no light, and it only leaves a gravitational fingerprint behind. In the case of dark matter stars, huge collections of this material began to cluster in patches, eventually forming the first stars in the universe right after the Big Bang, kickstarting the formation of normal stars and then galaxies. But as the universe continually expanded, dark stars became irrelevant, died, and probably went extinct. Water worlds. In a shocking new study, researchers are suggesting that there are exoplanets outside our solar system that are completely covered in water. These are water worlds with oceans deeper than anything we have ever seen before. And by deeper than anything, I'm talking hundreds or even thousands of miles or kilometers deep. The study was done by astronomer Li Zhang of Harvard University and his colleagues. Zhang explained that based on his team's computer simulations, Earth's oceans are basically puddles compared to what's lurking out there on planets outside our solar system. For example, the maximum depth of the ocean on Earth is at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, about 6.8 miles. But there are water worlds out there that are 2 or even 4 times larger than Earth with global oceans. These planets likely formed much further away from their host stars than they are today as giant balls of ice. But as they drifted closer to their stars and got warmer, that ice melted and their gravity was increased, causing the surface ice to turn to water and create oceans thousands of miles deep. And where there's water, there is almost always life. Just imagine a planet with an ocean 1,000 times larger than any we have, and the life forms that must be lurking within it. Weird moon substance. Chinese scientists found a weird substance on the far side of the moon. It happened last year, with their Yutu-2 rover stumbling across a curious substance that nobody could immediately identify. At first, the discovery sparked intense interest among lunar scientists because it didn't look like anything seen on the moon before. However, after a year of analyzing what appeared to be some kind of gel, scientists say the substance is actually made up of rock. They used a process called spectral unmixing to see what the most likely composition of the substance was. According to the researchers, the material is dark green. It glistens, and there is a pile of it about 20 inches long. They found the presence of glass, suggesting it was created during an impact event. There was some kind of impact that caused minerals to cement together and form a black, glossy, glass-like material. It never ended up being mysterious space goo like so many people thought at first, just the leftover rock residue of some past event that generated serious heat. It could have been from a space rock crashing into the moon. It could have even potentially been from some kind of ship taking off, with its thruster melting the surface rock into a type of craggy glass. Orcus. In Roman and Etruscan mythology, Orcus was not only god of the underworld, but also the punisher of broken promises. He was usually depicted as a large bearded giant who was very ugly. His role was to torment any soul that was evil and broke their oath. As punisher, he was extremely scary with his mouth open, representing oaths and promises, and perhaps even used as an entranceway to the underworld. He was the god of judgment, and later on was merged with Pluto and Hades and became more evil over time. Orcus originated before the days of Rome in the religion of the Etruscans. The Etruscans flourished long before Rome was even founded, but once the Romans grew and took over, they adopted a lot from them, including their gods. Those who did worship Orcus thought of him as a punisher of evildoers. His duty as god of the underworld was to punish all those who committed foul deeds during their life. Similar to how the name Hades refers to both a god and the underworld, Orcus could also either be the god's name or it could mean land of the dead. For the Etruscans, Orcus wasn't really evil. He was just a giant with a lot of hair who lived in the place where bad people go when they die. As he fell out of favor, the term came to represent demons and other evil or bad entities. From Orcus came the ogres and the orcs, which now refer to flesh-eating monsters from fairy tales. Orcus was once extremely important, but when Rome created their own god of the underworld, Pluto, Orcus took a back seat. He is now mostly remembered in the orcs of Lord of the Rings and ogres from French fairy tales who live on in his honor. Yama. Yama is the Hindu god of death, the king of the ancestors, and the ultimate judge of every human being's soul when they reach the afterlife. He's also known under a whole lot of other names, such as King of Ghosts, King of Justice, or simply Death. He is described as majestic with green or black skin, red eyes, and red garments. He carries a noose and a mace and rides on a creepy buffalo. As if that weren't enough, he has 2 dogs with 4 eyes that guard the entrance to his underground kingdom. His responsibility as the god of death was to make a decision based on every person's deeds performed throughout their life. It was up to him to decide just how moral a person was when they were alive. Yama was also a figure in Iranian mythology, Japanese, and Chinese mythology. Anywhere that Buddhism was present, Yama was a god of death. There are a lot of different versions of Yama's story. In almost all of them, he has a sister named Yami, sometimes Yamuna. Yama and his sister are either depicted as the first humans in the world or the people who created the human race. In the story where they are Adam and Eve, Yama is the first person to die and pass into the underworld. This is why he became its ruler. But Yama is quite different from other gods of the underworld in other cultures. He didn't always punish wicked people. Sometimes he lured souls to him just for fun. He did this using 2 great hounds, which coincidentally guard the path through the underworld that a dead person must take to reach Yama. These hounds are very similar to the Cerberus in Greek mythology. When Yama feels like he needs more souls, he sends his hounds to the surface to lure people down to him, where he awaits them in the underworld. Ariman. Ariman is one of the oldest lords of darkness ever created by humans. While not necessarily the god of the underworld, Ariman was an evil spirit in Zoroastrianism, one of the first religions in the world. He was the master of chaos, the instigator of human confusion and disappointment, and the celebrator of strife. He existed in direct opposition to a different spirit called Ahura Mazda, who was pure. Ahura Mazda was the king of the gods and the creator of the world, and to oppose him there was the lord of all the demons and evil things in the world, Ariman. These beliefs lasted all the way until around 330 BC, last adopted by the Achaemenid Empire. But there was a question about how exactly a being like Ariman, something of pure evil, could exist in a world created by Ahura Mazda, something of pure goodness. Another religion rose up to answer this question, called Zurvanism. In their story, a god called Zorvan gave birth to both Ariman and Ahura Mazda, thereby solving the issue. This made the existence of evil the result of Ariman choosing to pursue badness at all costs, while his brother Ahura Mazda was the exact opposite. This was the beginning of religious duality, the fight between good and evil. You might call Ariman the original Satan, the full and total embodiment of evil. Lilith. Lilith first appeared in Jewish mythology as a demon with black hair, who preys on newborn infants and occasionally seduces men and uses them to create hordes of demonic babies. She is pretty terrifying, and throughout the centuries, she's played a lot of different roles in religion. Her name only actually appears a single time in the Hebrew Bible, but she has managed to become Adam's first wife and even the bride of Samael, the demon king. Even before Judaism, demonic creatures like Lilith were endless. The Sumerians had female demons called Lilu, which appeared in the Epic of Gilgamesh. For the Mesopotamians, they had a demoness called Lamashtu. She would torture women as they were giving birth, cause them to have miscarriages, or even steal milk from breastfeeding infants. All of these demons are shockingly similar, and they are all early embodiments of Lilith. Today, a lot of people think of Lilith as Adam's first wife. This was not the case, and according to experts, the Lilith in the Hebrew Bible was simply referring to female demons in general, not a specific person. It was meant to be a plural of the word, just like the Sumerians used. The account of her being Adam's disobedient wife came from a satirical Jewish text written in the Middle Ages, one that was poking fun at biblical figures. It was heretical for its time, written by a man named Ben Sira. He made up the myth about Lilith and Adam, and it was never actually part of any real religious text. Are you familiar with the stories of Lilith? I think I heard about her from True Blood or Lucifer, one of those shows. Osiris. Osiris was the god of the underworld in Egyptian mythology. He was also the judge of the human soul, the god of vegetation, and closely connected to death, resurrection, and fertility. The ancient Egyptians thought Osiris was an actual person at one point, an ancient king who died and turned into a god. In the legend, Osiris was murdered by his brother Seth, then brought back to life as a symbol for the Egyptian people that life is indeed eternal. Unlike a lot of the evil lords of the underworld, Osiris wasn't out to harm anyone or to cause chaos. He was more of an inspiration in the afterlife than anything else. Osiris had one very specific job to do in the underworld. He was to weigh the heart of the deceased. The heart was believed to contain the record of every action that a person took in their life. The heart would be weighed against a feather from the goddess named Mat. The feather was a symbol of truth and justice. If the heart was heavier than the feather, it meant the person had not been just in their life. The heart was then fed to Amit the devourer, and the soul was forever lost to darkness. If the scales balanced out, Osiris would welcome the deceased into the afterlife for a never-ending party. Hades. Hades is without a doubt the most famous god of the underworld in our modern times. There are hundreds of gods from hundreds of lost religions, all of them ruling over the dead. And yet, because the love of Greek mythology has never died, Hades remains wildly popular and a key figure in pop culture. But here's the real story of Hades. He was the brother of both Zeus and Poseidon and the son of Rhea and Cronus, the Titans. After Hades and his brothers fought together to defeat their parents and rule over the Titans, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades split up the duties of ruling over the mortal world. Zeus became king of the gods, Poseidon became ruler of the seas, and Hades became lord of the underworld. Like Zeus, Hades was often represented as having a healthy beard. While Hades ruled the underworld, he was not the god of death. That was Thanatos, who would appear to humans to carry them off to the underworld when their time given to them by the fates was up. In Greece, Hades was a feared being. He wasn't necessarily evil, but he did like to collect souls, bring them down to his domain, and then refuse to let them leave. His dominion was segregated from the rest of the world by 5 underground rivers, with the famous river Styx being only one of them. The Greeks often depicted him as having a beard, carrying a pitchfork with 2 prongs and wearing a spiked helmet-like crown. His helmet was able to turn whoever wore it invisible. He also had a 3-headed dog named Cerberus who guarded the entrance to the underworld. Weiro. Weiro is from Maori mythology and the Lord of Darkness and embodiment of all things that are evil. He made his home deep in the underworld and was believed to be responsible for all bad things that happen to a person. The story of Weiro differed slightly though between the various Maori tribes. The main story was that when people died and their bodies were sent to the underworld, Weiro was there waiting to eat them. He's one of the only gods of the underworld that physically ate dead people, rather than torturing them for all eternity. The reason Weiro ate the bodies was that he became stronger with every person that he ate. The Maori believed that when Weiro finally consumed enough bodies, he would be powerful enough to break free of his prison in the underworld. He would then rise to the surface and eat everything and everybody living on the planet. This is actually one of the reasons why the Maori cremated their dead. They thought that if they burned the bodies of the deceased, Weiro would not be able to eat them, and therefore would not be able to grow more powerful. He couldn't gain strength from ashes, and so this was the only way they could think of to keep him from rising up from deep within the earth and causing Armageddon. Tuoni. Tuoni is the Finnish god of death who in old Finnish mythology ruled over the land of the dead called Tuonela. It was ruled by a single family of evil gods. Tuoni was the god of death, Tuonetar was the goddess of death, Tuonin Taito was the daughter of death, and Tuonin Poika was the son of death. For the Vikings, the underworld was a family affair. It's hard to say what Tuoni looked like, but when in his human form, he appears as an old man with 3 fingers on each hand and a cone hat that does not show his face. But each of these gods had their very own responsibility in the underworld. Tuoni would bring the dead down to their domain. His daughter let them pass as the gatekeeper, his wife welcomed them, and his son was the guard who kept watch. But the Vikings took death even further. There were a lot of gods and a lot of steps between dying and getting to the final afterlife. Tuoni worked closely with Kalma, the ruler of graveyards. Kalma took the dead by one hand, Tuoni took them by one foot, and they brought them down to Tuonela. But before a person died, the god Surma was sitting invisible beside their deathbed, waiting to cut their lifeline. She then alerted the other gods that they had a new arrival. Veles. Veles was known to the Slavic people of Eastern and Central Europe as the king of the underworld and the god of magic and alchemy. Veles was associated with supernatural powers and known to be the main god worshipped by witches, sorcerers, and all the other kinds of shamans of the ancient world. And for some bizarre reason, he also happened to be worshipped as the protector of livestock by shepherds. Veles is interesting because he was more like Gandalf than Satan. The Slavs saw him as the king of departed souls, which gave him a strong link to spirits and the natural world. Back before Christianity swept through Europe and destroyed all pagan religions, the Slavic people believed that nature and natural laws governed the world, nothing else. They also thought that priests and priestesses could see beyond the veil of reality to the other side, where Veles presided over all those who had died already. He wasn't evil in any kind of way, but was more like a godly medium who acted as a guide for dead souls. He was also a guide for those who entered trances to travel via their spirit into alternate dimensions. It wasn't until the Christians came that Veles got a bad reputation. When Christian ideology seeped into the Slavic world, Veles became the Lord of Death, a practitioner of evil, and god of the terrifying and awful underworld. They even started depicting him as a menacing god with horns, just like their Christian devil. Chibiabos. In the legends of the Algonquin, Chibiabos was god of the underworld. The Algonquin are the original native people of southern Quebec and eastern Ontario in Canada. He was also the twin brother of the hero Nanaboso. In his origin story, he was a wolf spirit, murdered by water panthers and horned serpents. His murder set off a devastating chain of reactions that resulted in the earth being completely destroyed by a flood. When the flood receded, Nanaboso was upset that he could not bring his brother back to life. To keep him around, at least in some regard, Nanabozo made it so that Chibiabos could become ruler of the underworld. In Native American myth, Chibiabos isn't evil at all, but rather a kind being who takes care of the land where the dead live, kind of like its humble caretaker. His story does change, varying from tribe to tribe. In some stories, his brother battled the evil water spirits for years to try to get his soul back. In other stories, Chibiabos died from falling through the ice. But in the end of every myth, he becomes the protector of souls and ruler of the dead. Nivester Broch. Nivester Broch has been called one of the most spectacular Iron Age settlements in northern Scotland by the Caithness Archaeological Trust. But this could very well be an understatement. The area of Caithness was home to a lot of Iron Age communities in Scotland, and Nivester was one of its largest. It was built sometime around 700 BC, unique for its connecting passages between stone buildings. The settlement wasn't that large, but it was quite complex for its time. People lived here about 1,000 years before Rome found its way to Britain and invaded it. Excavations of this ancient place began in the late part of the 19th century, thanks to Sir Francis Tress Barry. One of the most notable and interesting things about this particular settlement is the combination of ancient remains from the Iron Age, which are circular in nature, and the memorial known as Mervyn's Tower, which was built with stones removed from the site as a memorial to the nephew of Sir Francis Tress Barry. The memorial is strangely decorated with gargoyles and plaques and stands in odd contrast to the rest of the site. Apart from building the odd memorial tower, he and his excavation team discovered stone tools, random metal objects, and lost pieces of pottery at the site. Pretty much the exact same stuff you'd expect to find in any ruined Scottish settlement. The major difference here is that Nivester Broch has been gradually destroyed because of coastal erosion. The people who built this settlement did so on the very edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. Over thousands of years, the edge of the cliff has gotten shorter and shorter, meaning many parts of the mysterious settlement have already fallen into the water. Prehispanic Mexico. In Mexico, there is a new railway being installed on the Yucatan Peninsula. The railway is going to be fast, and it's going to zip people between the most important archaeological locations in the old territory of the Maya. But ahead of its construction, archaeologists have been hard at work trying to preserve any ancient ruins that the construction of the railway might destroy. And they have found a lot of stuff. Archaeologists with the National Institute of Anthropology and History have found thousands of mysterious pre-Hispanic sites, including burial grounds and structures, many dated as far back as the year 700 BC. According to a statement given by the researchers, they have found earth mounds, extremely complicated stone architecture, and thousands of pieces of broken artifacts. These discoveries could reveal a lot about the daily life and trade of the Maya people. But so far, the team has only looked at the first 140 miles of the Maya train project, which goes on for over 950 miles. The first discoveries came near the ruins of Palenque, an ancient Maya city. What all this means is that hidden underground, hiding under trees, and maybe even sitting in plain sight, are hundreds of lost settlements, villages, and secret temples that nobody has ever seen before. But unfortunately, the construction of this new train is probably going to cause them to be totally annihilated before any dedicated archaeologists even have a chance to study them. Cave of the Apocalypse. The Patmos Cave of the Apocalypse has been called the most spiritual cave in the entire world. It's located about halfway to the monastery of Agios Ioannis. It's a sacred grotto believed to be the exact place where Agios Ioannis had a vision from Christ, which he went on to record in the Book of Revelation. In case you aren't totally up to speed on Christian history, Agios Ioannis is sometimes referred to as the Apostle Ioannis. He was exiled to the island of Patmos in Greece around the year 95 AD. It was there that he is said to have received revelations from God, spoken to him from a cleft in a rock. It was the Apostle Ioannis in this cave, after he was exiled from his home by the Roman Emperor Domitian, who wrote the final book of the Bible, the Book of the Apocalypse. What is fascinating is that this isn't just some Christian fairy tale. The cave is very real, and it's been a sanctuary for around 2,000 years. You can still see today the very spot where Loannis rested his head each night. According to the legend, he used a rock as a pillow, and that rock is still sitting in the cave. But of course, the big mystery is trying to figure out what truly did happen inside the Cave of the Apocalypse 2,000 years ago. Did Agios Loannis truly hear the voice of God from a rock, describing to him how exactly the world would end? Or, on the other hand, was he a hallucinating or manipulating man who wrote himself quite the fiction? Many believers use these writings today as a blueprint for how the world will end. Tomb beneath the temple. Archaeologists conducting a survey at the Temple of Hatshepsut in Egypt have made an outstanding discovery in the form of a subterranean tomb. The temple itself was constructed during the 18th dynasty of Egypt, when the nation was under the rule of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Today, the Grand Temple can be found near the city of Luxor, still in shockingly good condition. It's one of the most picturesque temples in all of Egypt, built directly into the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, with its 3 terraces looking as though they had just been finished yesterday. Part of the great preservation has to do with the efforts of an archaeological expedition that has been working since 1961 to conserve the temple. Polish archaeologists with the Center for Mediterranean Archaeology have been doing an amazing job. During recent restoration work, they found a tomb and a burial chamber. The burial chamber was discovered filled with debris, lots of broken artifacts, and it probably belonged to someone who was related to the pharaoh. But here's what makes it so interesting. Archaeologists found a lot of artifacts, dozens and dozens of figurines depicting everything from deities to cows. Dr. Chudzik, who was involved with the study, believes the items were probably thrown into the tomb by the staff at the temple. They would have been accepting offerings to the dead pharaoh, but probably wouldn't have had enough places to store them. So they simply used the tomb of one of the pharaoh's relatives as a giant garbage dump for offerings. An ancient warship. Archaeologists have discovered an amazing and mysterious archaeological site on the coast of Riga, the capital of Latvia. The Latvian authorities were first alerted to the treasure by some local residents who found a chunk of a ship's hull poking through the sand at the beach. It's now believed that this strange ship has been sitting there for over 200 years. Archaeologists have removed over 36 feet of sand just to get a better glimpse of the ship, which is almost perfectly preserved. The reason the oak timbers have survived so long, despite being made of organic material, has to do with the sand. Being buried like that with very little access to oxygen allowed for the shipwreck to remain in awesome condition. The ship itself hasn't even been properly measured yet. There is so much sand that experts haven't been able to get a full view of the vessel. They don't even know exactly how old it is and have had to make some educated guesses based on physical evidence. Evidence like the shape of the ship, some copper nails found in its hull, and some copper plating. The use of all the copper suggests the ship was built by the British sometime in the 1870s. It could have been a warship or a merchant vessel, but nobody has any idea. Latvian archaeologists are still working to fully excavate the ship and maybe even discover its cargo still intact. Men and Toll. Men and Toll was built in the Bronze Age, making it roughly 3,500 years old. The reason the site is so exciting is that it's unique and one of a kind. It consists only of 4 giant stones, with one of them being a circular stone with a hole punched through its middle. The other 3 stones are ordinary granite pillars, just like any pillar that was used in dozens and even hundreds of stone circles across England and France. Men and Toll is hardly as exciting as Stonehenge, but it's fascinating in its own special way. It's the rock with the hole in its center that's really quite fascinating. The hole is about 3 feet across and was used in ancient rituals. The old people who lived here, descendants probably of the people who built Stonehenge, associated the holed stone with magical powers. They thought that if you had back pain, this stone could heal you. They also thought that they could heal a child suffering from rickets or tuberculosis using the stone. For the latter, you would take the naked child and pass them 3 times through the stone, at which point they were supposed to be cured. Though, of course, this probably didn't work. What do you think is the meaning behind this holed stone? Have you visited this ancient site? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because we have lots more videos like these coming up. Roman battlefield. A hobby archaeologist made a shocking discovery that led real archaeologists to excavate a mysterious ancient battle site from ancient Roman times. The amateur archaeologist found an impressive ancient dagger over 2,000 years old. This prompted researchers with the University of Basel to go investigate. They then found more old relics, such as stones from slingshots, a handful of coins, some random nails, and a piece of a shield. All these artifacts had been left behind after a clash between a local tribe and the advancing Romans around the year 15 BC. The battlefield is in the southeast corner of Switzerland, in a giant field that nobody would ever think had once been the scene of a massacre. Archaeologists believe the battle was fought between the forces of Rome and a local Rhaetian tribe. Peter Schwartz, who is associated with the research team, says it's the first time the remains of a Roman battle have ever been found in Switzerland. Probably 1,500 soldiers fought, which makes it a pretty small battle compared to others throughout Europe. But it may have been an extremely important battle. This was at a time when the Roman Emperor Augustus was trying to expand Roman control and bring the nearby mountain regions into the fold. Vanquishing these tribes, who the Romans saw as barbarians, was the first step into a great and all-powerful empire. Underground Etruscan Pyramids. In Italy, a mysterious set of underground pyramids from the enigmatic Etruscan culture were recently found. To make things even more shocking, the remains of the pyramids were found underneath a wine cellar in the small city of Orvieto. The wine cellar is relatively new, but the archaeologists discovered an ancient set of stairs carved into the wall that led them underground. What they discovered was a series of caves carved like a pyramid, along with various tunnels hinting at even deeper structures below that have yet to be found. We are dealing with a lot of layers here. Keep in mind that the wine cellar was built sometime in the 20th century. Underneath the cellar were the remains of a medieval floor. Underneath that, there was a layer filled with artifacts dating all the way back to the 5th century BC. These artifacts were clearly left behind by the Etruscans, who built complex underground structures. But under the layer of artifacts is even more mystery just waiting to be discovered. Archaeologists are still busy tunneling beneath the wine cellar to see just how huge of a complex the Etruscans built. There could be multiple pyramidal structures still hiding underground, which only adds to the mystery of the Etruscans. The Etruscans were basically the first Romans. They are believed to have taught French people how to make wine, taught the Romans how to build roads, and were the first ones to write in Europe. They flourished in central Italy around the year 900 BC, dominated for 500 years, and then were completely wiped out or absorbed into the Roman Empire. Lost Fortress. Archaeologists doing excavations in the Judean foothills of Israel have discovered a Hellenistic fortress that was probably destroyed during a battle 2,100 years ago. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, their archaeologists have found coins, weapons, and charred wooden beams in this mysterious fortress. The charred beams would suggest that the fortress succumbed to fire and was burned down during an attack by the Seleucids. Here's a bit of background. 2,100 years ago, Judea was ruled by the Hasmoneans. Modern scholars believe this was the first independent kingdom of Israel in history. However, things weren't quite peaceful. The region was under the iron thumb of Hellenistic rule, with the Seleucid dynasty being in control at this time. When they initiated anti-Jewish decrees, the Hasmoneans rebelled and fought back. The Hellenistic forces had erected a line of protection to protect the city of Marisha. This newly discovered fortress had probably been part of that defensive line, but judging by the evidence of burning, it would appear the Judean rebel forces tore through the fortifications like a bull through paper, going on to overthrow their suppressors and rule their own kingdom. Cythian Treasures. In Russia, a mysterious gravesite dating back 2,400 years has been discovered. Well, it's less of an individual gravesite and more of a necropolis, an entire cemetery of tombs that still hold the bodies of ancient Scythian warriors. The Scythians were nomadic people who lived in what they call Scythia. Today, this area comprises many parts of Kazakhstan, Siberia, and even pieces of Ukraine. But what's truly interesting about the Scythians is that they didn't leave behind any written history, and they never built any cities. Their entire culture is a mystery, with what little we know about them being based on writings from other civilizations like the Greeks and the Assyrians. The only physical link we have to these lost people comes in the form of buried treasure discovered in tombs. In this necropolis, graves have yielded impressive artifacts that could teach us more about Scythia. Archaeologists have found things like silver plates decorated with strange gods and hybrid animals. It would appear they had a very complicated mythology, complete with unknown gods and fantastic beasts that we know literally nothing about. Thanks for watching! Which archaeological place would you love to visit the most if given the chance? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to check out the hundreds of videos we have on the channel. See you later! Bye!